Fossil fuels are dirty, right? Everybody knows that. And renewable energy technologies like wind and solar, well, they're clean, right? Sure, everybody knows that. Well, think again. In their new book, Clean Energy Exploitations, Ron Stein and Todd Royal expose the nasty underside of wind and solar, uh, and that is child and slave labor in hypertoxic, unregulated mining for cobalt, lithium, and other precious metals. Toxic waste from mining and refining these and other rare earths, without which wind turbines and solar panels can't be made. Toxic waste from decommissioned solar panels and billions of tons of non-recyclable plastics from turbine blades. And that's just the beginning. Full life cycle analysis shows that fossil fuels are actually cleaner, more environmentally friendly than so-called clean energy technology from renewables like wind and solar. That's going to be our topic of discussion tonight on From the Stacks as co-authors Ron Stein and Todd Royal join us. Thank you very much for tuning in this evening. We are presented by the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. And we tell people we're trying to save the planet from the people who are trying to save the planet. That's one quick way of putting it. We're actually a network of about 70 scholars, scientists, economists, theologians, and philosophers, religious leaders, dedicated to educating the public and policymakers on three things simultaneously and interwoven: biblical earth stewardship, economic development for the very poor around the world, and the gospel of Jesus Christ, together with the biblical worldview, theology, and ethics that come along with that. So thanks very much for joining us tonight. Every month, the Cornwall Alliance, as a way of saying thank you for donations, offers to send a free resource. And this month, we are offering Ron Stein and Todd Royal's book, Clean Energy Exploitations, helping citizens understand the environmental and humanity abuses that support clean energy. This is, I think, a fabulous book. I've read it with care, and it just exposes so much that needs to be understood. It's something that you will want to read, that you'll want to pass on to others near you. You want to pass on the lessons from it. And so, as our way of saying thank you, when you make a 100% tax deductible donation of literally any size for the month of February, we will be glad to send you a free copy of this wonderful book. To make your request, just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, just write in promo code 22-02. That's promo code 22-02, or you can write in the title, Clean Energy Exploitations. Either one, we'll know what you want, and we will gladly send you a copy. Doesn't matter how large or how small your donation is, 100% will be tax deductible when you ask for this. So again, thank you for joining us. And now I would like to bring on Ron Stein and Todd Royal, the co-authors of Clean Energy Exploitations. And I would like each of them to introduce himself, give us a bit of his background, and tell us how he got into doing this kind of thing. What was it that opened your eyes to the things that you reveal in this book? So Ron, let's start with you as the senior partner here.
Senior is right.
At least the color of your hair
I'm
indicates it, right?
yeah, the color of the hair tells it all. I'm a professional engineer here in California, and I spent the first 20 years of my career in the energy sector, working with one of the big engineering and construction companies, building energy projects around the world. And the last 10 years, I just developed a passion for trying to provide energy literacy to the public. And I've been a prolific op-ed writer of articles as well as books with Todd Royal. And in fact, we even have a website, energyliteracy.net. And the passion is energy can get pretty complicated pretty quick, but we have all the op-eds and all the books are in layman's terms so they can be understood. Our goal is to get people to be able to talk about energy at the dinner table and not be blown away by what you hear in the press or the social media. And if they're a little bit more energy literate, that is our goal. And the books, especially the last book, Clean Energy Exploitation, it's to bring transparency to what is going on around the world. And it's interesting because of the message in the book. I want to say, not because of the English. Todd and I are still trying to master the English language, but the message in the book got it to be nominated for Pulitzer Prize. And so, if it if it does achieve that, we'll find that out in April. It's just going to be another step to make it more transparent to the world. You've heard of blood diamonds? Well, these are blood minerals that are
Mhm.
causing us to go green. And it's only the healthy and wealthy countries that's doing that. So, anyhow, that's a little bit about me. I'll let Todd explain about who he is.
Yeah, Todd, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name's Todd Royal. Good thing. First off, Calvin, thanks for having us. Good to see you, Ron. My name's Todd Royal. I am based out of McKinney, Texas, which is about 35, 40 minutes northeast of Dallas. Began in energy, had worked for an energy firm in college. My undergrad was in business economics. My master's is in public policy, and really began to want to get into energy again whenever I was in graduate school. I did my master's thesis titled Hydraulic Fracturing and the Revitalization of the American Economy. So, what I was able to do was look at coming out of the quote unquote Great Recession. I looked at three states. I compared Texas and North Dakota to California, those who used fracking, hydraulic fracturing, versus those who didn't. And obviously, Texas and North Dakota exploded in growth post the recession versus California. And you can certainly see that now, which that led me to begin writing and working. I've worked for Duke University. I've done consulting and analysis work on all forms of clean energy, from lithium ion batteries to industrial solar farms, industrial wind farms. So I've been able to really look at the entire energy spectrum. Currently working on advanced nuclear technologies that focus on small modular reactors and how you can incorporate that to have a cleaner and healthier environment, as people don't realize that nuclear is the only electrical source that doesn't emit any carbon emissions. It's completely zero carbon, zero emissions. So that's been my background. As Ron had said, I've written over 250 op-ed articles on energy and the weaponization of energy, foreign policy, national security, even dipped my toe in a little bit of California politics when I previously lived there in Los Angeles for 26 years. And so now it's really really how we came about, Ron and I as well, was he had read some of my work. He asked me would I want to work with him with the American Society of Civil Engineers to work on California's energy and electricity infrastructure report. I said yes. He then tasked me with what I thought at the time was an impossible task. What would it take to rebuild the California grid? There's three investor-owned utilities. What would it take to rebuild it? What would be a time frame? What would then be the cost? That work really led to our second book called Just Green Electricity. We have a first book called Energy Made Easy, and the third one, which you have us on about, which is Clean Energy
Yeah.
Exploitations. And that's what got me to really begin to go, wait a minute, we're using things that are blood minerals, very similar to that
Yeah.
Leonardo DiCaprio movie, Blood Diamond, for us to really realize is you're looking at our book now, you're seeing that's a true picture of nickel being mined in the Congo. So that's being mined at the point of a gun. And so Ron had said, would I like to do this third book? And I said yes. And so that's what's brought us here together. And so yeah, again, thanks for promoting the book, Calvin. We appreciate it a lot.
Oh, we're delighted to do it. It's a great educational tool, and we have pretty active people who follow the Cornwall Alliance. So as this gets out into their hands, its message is going to be multiplied around the country. So I'm delighted with that. You know, it's pretty ironic that Leonardo DiCaprio, who did Blood Diamonds, is a climate alarmist fanatic. And,
Yeah.
you know, of course,
Yes.
he's hypocritical. He runs around in this magnificent, huge yacht that has enormous carbon dioxide emissions from its use of
Sure.
diesel fuel. But it's ironic that he makes blood diamonds and then he is defending the very energy technologies that are resulting in blood cobalt and blood lithium and blood all sorts of other minerals that are
Mhm.
absolutely indispensable to making solar panels and wind turbines. Now, Todd, I want to come back to you. You mentioned that you actually worked for a while on both wind farms and solar farms. Actually, I hate calling the things farms. They're not farms. You know, on farms you grow plants and raise animals. These are factories, and they should be called factories. But you worked on wind and solar facilities for a time. Presumably, while you were working on them, you believed in what you were doing. How did you get turned around on this?
Well, for me, it was I was doing research and analysis on them.
Oh, I
So it
see.
wasn't even yeah, it wasn't a belief that I was doing them. It was a I was brought in to do analysis. I'd done some work on a legal case. Then I'd done work also on lithium ion storage batteries.
Okay.
So really, it for me, I was real fortunate because I really got to see the entire spectrum and really got to understand what does it take to make these industrial size solar and wind farms. What does it take? All the toxic, rare earth metals and minerals. What are the land requirements? How do they actually work? Do they
Yeah.
work? Do they bring the amount of electricity that they say they're going to bring? Baseload electricity. So I really got a very good understanding of that. And then I put Ron into the mix when he said, let's look into this on a deeper, more human level. And that was really the most eye opening, revealing. Uh,
Yeah.
I call this really an investigation book into human rights. And so it was the hardest thing I've ever written. It was a very painful journey for me to write the book because I do have children. I have young children, and to realize the way young children are being enslaved to make solar panels in China, to get the cobalt in the Congo, nickel in Russia, the South American
Mhm.
lithium triangle, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Ron's got a really
Yeah.
good term for this. He calls it leakage, where he goes, what you're doing is you're trying to have this virtue that says, look at me, I'm clean, I'm green, I'm being really good for the environment, but I don't have to look at any of it. So I'll just let those other people, um, you
Yeah.
know, I'll have those other people. They'll be the ones that will be enslaved. Meanwhile, me and my children will have plenty of heat, air conditioning, food, except all the comforts of a modern society. Which really
Mhm.
we reveal everything in the book. And honestly, Calvin, that was the toughest. That was a very eye-opening, revealing thing to me. I'd looked at it more from a policy standpoint. I'd looked at it from the
Yeah.
electricity standpoint. Then you get into the human rights of it, and you just go, "Oh my gosh, this is much
Yeah.
more than I ever realized."
And I want to get into that. We're going to start diving into your book in some significant ways. But I want to pick up on a bit of what you said. Part of what you were doing, your work was actually doing an analysis of what it would take to essentially redo the California grid to make it work with wind and solar instead of nuclear and natural gas and coal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in what you wound up discovering there in that and how it compares with a very recent article in the Manhattan Contrarian by Francis Menton, who was talking about a study that found that, well, basically it would take about twice the annual gross domestic product of California to do that. I
Mm-hmm.
believe it was
Yeah.
3 trillion some dollars to redo that grid. What did you find?
I would find, and I'm a big fan of his work, but I'd really found that it was going to be 10 trillion because you were going to have to put most everything underground. Underground, typically,
Yeah.
Ron and I'd found, Ron, what was it, like close to like $1 million, million and a half per, call it per mile. You're going to have to weatherize everything. You were going to have to
Yeah,
then try to make some kind of smart grid, smart technology. You're definitely going to have to meter the grid because of all the fluctuation from intermittent renewables, or as Ron likes to say, sunshine and breezes. You're going to have to
That's right.
hook up enormous amounts of batteries that currently don't even exist, that amount. So I would say it was what I'd seen was about 10 to 12 trillion. I was going to say it's going to be minimal 10 years, if not 20 years. And as Ron, we put in our book, you're looking at 28 different state and federal, not even really counting local government agencies that you're going to need approvals from. And then you're going to have to put
yeah,
in brand new transmission lines, which Robert Bryce has done great work on that. You mentioned
yeah.
Robert. Most people. So you're talking about upending an entire state in one of the biggest construction projects in America. It's hard to imagine that they'd want to do that.
Yeah.
So I came up with 10 to 12 with about a 10 to 20
Hmm.
year process. But that is with everything going correctly. And I think if the engineer who I've co-written these books with would tell you
Yeah.
there's no project, whether you're redoing a bathroom, much less trying to do a multi 10 to 20 trillion dollar brand new construction of the entire California grid.
Yeah,
Similarly,
Calvin,
on a
that's basically
national
it's the bottom of
scale,
the strip.
on a
It's
national scale, I just read a study out of an organization in Canada that concluded that to completely put America's whole energy uh, economy, the grid, electric vehicles, all of our transportation systems, except airplanes, to put all of that on electricity, and to get all that electricity from wind and solar would cost $433 trillion,
I saw
which
the
is,
same. I saw the same
yeah,
study. Yeah,
just
yeah.
extraordinary. And people are just not thinking about what to do. How do we do this? Where do we get $433 trillion? We just had a major battle in Congress over a $5 trillion bill.
Mhm.
Well, 433 is a little bit more than five. Ron, you were about to say something and I cut you off. I'm sorry.
yeah, the it's a bottomless pit because wind and solar, what I call breezes and sunshine, can only generate intermittent electricity. There's three fossil fuels. There's coal, natural gas, and oil. Coal and natural gas are primarily used for generating electricity, and the goal of the Green New Deal is to replace that with wind and solar. Crude oil, on contrary, never is used for generating electricity, and they want to eliminate
Right,
all fossil fuels. And the thing about crude oil is it's used to manufacture something else. And what does it manufacture? It manufactures the oil derivatives that account for more than 6,000 products that are part of our daily
hmm,
lives that we did not have before 1900. And those products are part of the medical industry, communications, electronics, the space program. And it also generates fuel for what I call the heavyweight long range infrastructure, airplanes,
right,
ships,
right.
the military, the space program, because electric vehicles, batteries might run what I call the lightweight short range infrastructures, cars and trucks and buses, because they're not going very far. But you can't get rid of crude oil. There's no substitute for it. We've had
Right.
over 100 years to replace it, and we've been unable to do it. If we get rid of crude oil, we're going to get rid of the medical industry, get rid of communications, and what's most importantly, everything you need to make wind and solar panels is made with those oil derivatives. The
Yeah,
EV
yeah.
car is made with the oil derivatives. So you get rid of crude oil, and you get rid of wind, you get rid of solar, and you get rid of the EV industry. And so,
Yeah, but
crude oil is
Ron,
being bought on
some
the
people on the other side are going to come back at you and say, yeah, but oil is a finite substance. We're going to run out of it. We might as well learn to do with it without it now.
Well, you have to understand too that every country has oil, and it's being with fracking. We're finding out there's more and more of it. Our goal is to basically enhance efficiency and basically just be more useful in what we have to make it last as long. You know, like I say, we've had more than 100 years to come up with a clone to crude oil. We haven't. Maybe sometime we will. But,
Yeah.
you know, having wind and solar, no matter what the grid is, it's only electricity. Electricity, you know, can charge your iPhone, but it can't make your iPhone. It can make a defibrillator work, but it can't make the defibrillator. And so electricity has limitations, and you know there's an opportunity. There's no silver bullet answer to the energy
Yeah.
solution, but you know, solar has a spot, wind has a spot, EV vehicles have a spot, and but yeah, crude oil that's the lifeblood of the economy.
Yeah.
It's you know it's allowed people to extend their life longevity. We now have eliminated virtually all weather-related fatalities because we basically control our lives with the weather. If it's cold, we heat the homes. If it's hot, we air condition the homes. And yeah, it's really it's one thing that it's on the chopping block because everybody wants to eliminate all fossil fuels. But until you have a backup plan, I'm not ready to jump out of the airplane without a parachute.
Yeah. Todd, a while ago you mentioned China using Uyghur and child slave labor to produce solar panels. You mentioned in the Congo, they're using child, essentially slave labor to mine cobalt and some other minerals. Similar things going on, I think, is it Bolivia in Latin America, or which country is it?
So really, they
Yeah.
call that lithium
Um,
triangle down there.
yeah. You know, the natural immediate response is to blame these countries, and certainly there's plenty of blame due there. But in your book, you actually put the blame more on Western countries, including the United States, for this abusive labor practice in these countries. Why is that?
Because we're the ones that are using electric vehicles, we're the ones that are using predominantly solar panels and wind turbines. It's really hard to blame an authoritarian dictatorship like China. That's what a dictator does. They enslave people for their own enrichment. But we are a democracy. We have an open press. We have access to the internet. We have open source material. It is known that the Uyghur Muslims, which shockingly or not shockingly, not one Middle Eastern country has spoken out in favor of them the way they would the Palestinians. These people are being enslaved. They are being raped. They are put in internment camps. This is not unsimilar to what happened to Jews in Nazi Germany right now that made products to sustain the German military machine. This is what is
Yeah.
sustaining the entire Chinese supply chain of rare earth exotic minerals that go into solar panel, wind turbine blades, battery storage systems. But in particular, it's the solar panels. So I blame, and we do in the book, and we back it up factually, that it's very
You sure
tough to
do.
say that I'm going to listen to a COP26 announcement on climate change in Glasgow, Scotland, whenever we're not doing anything to assist people being enslaved globally. So
Yeah.
we can have so we can have some form of quote unquote green energy. It just doesn't make sense, and we felt in the book that we needed to call that out and bring it to light.
You know, for a long time in the mainly the late 1980s, all through the 90s, into the early 2000s, there were a lot of Western human rights activists who were protesting Western clothing manufacturers, shoe manufacturers,
Mm-hmm.
for using what they were describing as sweatshop labor in Southeast Asia. Very, very low wages there, paid to, and oftentimes women and children. And the people were protesting that and demanding that these companies pull out of those places and stop using that kind of labor, paying those sorts of wages. Now, the ironic thing is that what happened when they did finally bow to that pressure and pull out, later studies showed that the vast majority of the people who used to work in those clothing shops wound up in prostitution and even in the sex slavery around the world. But at least these people who protested seemed to have some sort of a sense of moral obligation to try to defend the oppressed in those countries. I'd be interested to know whether either one of you, Ron or Todd, do you have any idea why it is that the people who protested those things are not protesting not just the fact of this slave labor in China and other countries, but also the Western world countries, or companies rather, that are cooperating with that?
I think the world has somehow gotten mesmerized with this Green New Deal. It's interesting. Well, you mentioned, you challenged me that oil has limitations, how much there is in the world. Well, there's a limitation on the exotic minerals and metals because there may not be enough lithium in the world to build as many batteries as we want to build. And, this thing about boycotting the clothing industry sources in China, Biden has come out to boycott the Winter Olympics because of China's labor practices. And yet he's so bought into this Green New Deal, he needs those exotic minerals and metals for this country to electrify our society. And he's not saying a thing about the blood minerals that it's taking to achieve that goal. It's pretty hypocritical, but I guess that's his choice, and
Yeah.
nothing further said.
Calvin,
Thank
I'll
you.
add to that. What we found in the book is that you find that there are numerous billionaires such as Michael Bloomberg, George Soros, Tom Steyer, Bill Gates, that are directly benefiting from solar panels, wind turbines, battery storage system. Um, the gentleman I can't think also I'm drawing a blank who Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett,
Yeah.
they are directly benefiting off of this slave labor because they have heavily invested in these industrial solar farms, industrial wind farms. The whole notion of green energy, really, as we showed, is just about taxpayer money. Because without the subsidies, such as the investment tax credit for solar, the production tax credit for wind, or as Warren Buffett famously said, you would never put up a wind farm if it wasn't for the tax subsidies.
Yeah.
So they have a vested interest. Their billions and millions are invested in these things. And whereas before these were titans of industry who had to work very hard to build the Microsofts, the Bloombergs of the world, build these massive companies, they're looking at things where they already have subsidies for people to buy their electricity. They crowd everything else off the grid. And so now they're making millions, if not billions, off something that's off the back of people in China, in the Congo.
Yeah.
So you also take Western foundations, Tide Foundation, Ford Foundation, hypocritically the Rockefeller Foundation.
Rockefeller.
They all give heavily to Democratic politicians. They get elected. They then get to use this kind of PR that says I'm green. They then get to make millions upon millions, if not billions of dollars off things that don't work because it's subsidized by US taxpayers, European taxpayers, Australian taxpayers, really anybody in the
Yeah.
West that's doing any of this nonsense. So
Yeah.
that's why you see this happening.
Elon Musk, I mean, similar to Buffett, who Buffett said you'd never build a wind turbine if it weren't for subsidies because you
Yeah.
can't make money on them without the
No.
subsidies. Well, Elon Musk of Tesla said something similar about electric vehicles. I mean, he's famous for the Tesla, and frankly, it's an engineering marvel. It's a magnificent automobile, although its
Yes.
roughly 1,000-pound battery makes it
Mhm.
a huge waste of energy, really.
Yeah.
But Musk actually said a similar thing, that if it weren't for the subsidies to electric vehicles, there would be no real market for them, and therefore there would be no market for Tesla. But I
Mhm.
want to get back to this, but just quickly, let me mention to those folks who have just recently tuned in, our guests tonight are Ron Stein and Todd Royal, the authors of the book Clean Energy Exploitations, Helping Citizens Understand the Environmental and Humanity Abuses that Support Clean, that's in scare quotes, clean, quote and unquote, clean energy. And for the month of February, the Cornwall Alliance, as our way of saying thank you when you make a 100% tax deductible donation of literally any size, will be glad to send you a free copy of this 350 some page book as our way of saying thank you. To request yours, just go to cornwallalliance.org. That's cornwallalliance.org. Click on the donate button. And as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, just enter promo code 22-02. That's for February of 2022. Promo code 22-02 or the title Clean Energy Exploitations, and we'll be glad to send you a completely free copy of this really extraordinary book that I think you will want to read and then share the lessons from it with many other people. All right, back to Ron and Todd here. Ron, you mentioned early on that around 1900, so about 120 years ago, we just experienced enormous transformations in our world because of derivatives from petroleum. Build on that a little bit. I mean, you mentioned some 6,000 different derivative products. Don't try to name them all, but you could give
No,
us
no.
some good examples of things that people use all the time and they don't think about the fact that, hey, this comes from petroleum.
Yes, the time frame around 1900, that changed everything. Because in the 1800s and before that, most people never traveled 100 to 200 miles from where they were born. Life expectancy was in the 20 to 30-year range, and a lot of diseases and early fatalities, weather-related fatalities. And then around 1900, we invented the automobile, invented the airplane, and we really started discovering what crude oil was used for. And we were able to get derivatives out of it, which made other things. And when you think about it, before 1900, we had no medical industry, we had no airline industry, we had no telecommunications, and like I say, everything changed at that time. Before 1900, I want to say we were a decarbonized society, and everybody wants to decarbonize us. Well, in the 1800s, there were no coal-fired power plants, there were no natural gas power plants, and there were no derivatives, and no airplanes, and no vehicles, and no militaries. And I'm not quite ready to go back to the 1800s and decarbonize it. If you really want to look what a decarbonized society looks like, take a look at developing countries. These developing countries, because they don't have all the products we have that makes our life so comfortable. And in these poor countries, you have to understand that there's 8 billion people in the world. And 80% of that population, which is a big number, it's more than 6 billion people, they're living on less than $10 a day. And in developing countries, there's 11 million kids dying every year from malnutrition, starvation, diarrhea, diphtheria. Everything's preventable if they had what we have in the wealthy countries. And,
Yeah.
if we eliminate crude oil, we'll be in parallel with them, not being able to fight
Mhm.
disease. We couldn't have fought
Yeah.
COVID without this because everything in the Hospitals made with fossil fuels. Medications are made with fossil fuels. And if we didn't have the fossil fuels, we wouldn't be coming out of this COVID mess that we've been involved the last couple of years. So yeah,
Fertilizer that allows us to grow
oh
far
yeah.
more
Well,
crop
fertilizer,
on
like I
less
say,
land.
fertilizer is
Yeah,
made with natural gas and it feeds the world. Now, with the world being 8 billion people, there's like 56,000 merchant ships moving product all over the world. Well, to keep those 8 billion people alive, you got to keep those ships moving to move the products back and forth and the medical supplies. And if you get rid of crude oil, you can eliminate the merchant ships. And yeah, that would be the greatest
yeah,
threat to civilization, elimination of crude oil.
yeah. Abundant, affordable, reliable, scalable energy. Scalable meaning you can get so much of it that you can meet all the needs of an enormous population at a very high level of prosperity. That energy is absolutely crucial to prosperity, to national security, and so on. Todd, you all mention somewhat in your book the importance of national security with regard to the desired switch to renewables, especially to wind and
Hmm.
solar, away from fossil fuels. I think a lot of folks don't realize just how crucial to national security these things have been: coal and oil and natural gas more recently, but especially oil.
Hmm.
Japan uh, needed to launch its effort to take over and turn into its empire much of the eastern Pacific, the Western Pacific, because it didn't have its own oil resources. It needed to
Yep.
secure those from that area. Hitler attacked Russia in order to take over the Ukraine to get at oil supplies in the Caucasus. Um,
Yep.
this has been a constant theme, and people will say, no lives for oil, and yet uh, if we don't have the oil, we lose lives, maybe even more
Hmm.
lives. I mean, this is part of why securing oil resources has been a major central part of American foreign policy for uh,
Hmm.
a century easily.
Easily.
Um, but go into the national security implications of the demand that we move away from fossil fuels to wind and solar. Talk about the roles of Russia and China, I think especially China on this, but frankly also Iran. What do we
Hmm.
face in terms of national security challenges?
Well, we're facing a possible invasion of Ukraine as we speak because of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline by Gazprom, which is a state owned Russian firm that reports directly to the Kremlin. There's a term that's come out of Russia called the weaponization of energy. China does the same thing, except they'll use their manufacturing prowess that's based upon coal fired power plants. They have hundreds on the drawing board, hundreds they're building for that very reason. If we step back and look at this weaponization of energy, it began in World War II. Churchill had said it, FDR had said it, Stalin had said it. They all agreed on one thing, that without abundant energy, which at that point would have been coal, you do not win World War II. That was a manufacturing war that the United States could build more planes, more ships, more bullets, more guns to defeat, Imperial Japanese and the Nazi Germany. That was all based on energy. You come forward to now, and you have the Chinese that will do anything, any human rights violation to secure natural gas, oil. You look at this deal that we're trying to do with Iran to curb their nuclear ambitions. Well, the way that they pay for all this is by oil and natural gas. Iran has some of the biggest reserves of both in the world. The Russians have massive reserves of it. The Russians will literally take their monies that are coming from their oil and natural gas firms and coal, directly goes to the Kremlin, directly goes to their military. Their military now is a very advanced military. So this is a military that can invade Ukraine and can take over Ukraine. not without a fight,
Yeah.
but they will win. And it is because the Europeans refuse to frack for their own oil and natural gas. They close down their nuclear power plants, and they all do this off this Malthusian notion of less human beings. The world is going to cook, and they listen to a delusional who needs medical help little girl named Greta Thunberg, and they believe her. They believe John Kerry. They believe Al Gore. And what the Europeans are doing right now, without the Americans and NATO, Russia would invade today. They would invade Ukraine. And my personal
Yeah.
opinion is they would keep going. They would probably take all the former Soviet satellite states, and who's to say they would stop? And this is
Right.
all based off energy. It is all based on this notion of weaponizing your energy. Or in the case of Chinese, the Chinese, they're going to weaponize their resources. But make no mistake, too, they are using their military every single day to terrorize and harass the
Yeah.
Taiwanese. They want that back. And they know the larger their economy becomes, the more manufacturing that emanates out of China, the more we need their sneakers, their blood minerals, their you name it, they produce it. And they
Yeah.
produce all of that based off coal-fired power plants, based off nuclear power plants. They are putting as much energy and as many emissions they are spewing into the world so they can use that energy to take over at least their part of the
Yeah.
world, but certainly do away with what you'd refer to, and we did in the book, the liberal-led World War II order that came about after the
Yeah.
Bretton Woods conference and
Yeah.
agreement. So this is all wrapped together. We do cover this even much more extensively in the book.
Yeah. And, you know, for a lot of people who don't really focus on studying the role of energy in
Mm-hmm.
geopolitics and the like, the role of energy in life, this just seems really strange. I mean, why is it that we fight wars over energy, but we don't fight wars over, say, cotton or hardwoods or silicon for sand, from sand or something like that? And the reason is that energy is the indispensable material resource. You have to have energy for everything we do,
Mm-hmm.
to produce food, clothing, shelter, transportation, communication, medical care. Everything that we do requires energy. And everything that we do is related to just simply staying alive. I mean, you don't stay alive without this. And so I think it's important that for the sake of people who don't spend their lifetime studying energy, as the two of you do, that we make that clear to them. I do want to point out, since we're on the issue of national security and geopolitics, last month, and I believe our producer will have a copy of a photo of this cover handy, perhaps. Last month, as our gift to donors when they made a donation and asked for it, we were using Patricia Adams's study called China's Energy Dream. And though that offer ended at midnight last night, I'll extend it for viewers of this program. If you would like to request a copy of China's Energy Dream, just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form,
Mm-hmm.
in the comments field, enter China's Energy Dream or promo code 22-01 for that one. We would ask you to request either that or the new book, or if you'd like to do both, well, you could always do two donations. Doesn't matter how large or how small either of the donations is. We'll be glad to send you either one of these or both as our way of saying thank you when you do that. Ron, build on this whole issue of what particularly China is doing in terms of its own energy infrastructure. I mean, China signed on to the Paris Agreement that supposedly commits all these countries, 194 countries that signed on to it, to reducing their CO2 emissions so that we can fight global warming. Uh, you know, how is China living up to that? What are they doing?
Well, there's nothing to live up to because they're exempt if they don't achieve what they want to achieve. Uh, they they basically promised that they basically said we'll try, and but no, they have most of the coal-fired power plants right now. They're building the equivalent of like one coal-fired power plant a day, and it's crazy. The interesting thing about the wealthy countries that want to go green is that America, the UK, Germany, Australia combined represent maybe 7% of the world's population. Those wealthy countries could literally disappear. Every person, manufacturer, anything that emitted emissions, wipe them off the face of the earth. And what's going to happen? Emissions are going to explode because China, India, and Africa, they're building coal-fired power plants, and they need that. I mean, their people are poor. They need basic electricity. Most people haven't enjoyed the Industrial Revolution. They don't have the life we have. We live in la la land, and it's it's appalling. And we have, as Todd mentioned, the policies we have actually leaks the manufacturing somewhere else. I know I'm here in California, and I really think our Governor Newsom only believes he breathes California air because they'll do everything possible to reduce emissions in California. Doesn't matter if we've got to import it from halfway around the world and bring it to California ports through ships that are polluting worse than anything else. That doesn't count. And the environmental laws that are non-existent in foreign countries, that doesn't count. The labor laws don't exist in foreign countries. That doesn't count. And like I say, that's what this book is all about, is bringing the transparency, because these countries, they want to be like us. And the only way they're going to get there is with energy. Calvin, you have to understand, there's a confusion about energy. People talk about wind and solar being energy. Wind and solar aren't energy, they're only electricity. They can only generate electricity. Wind turbines and solar panels physically cannot manufacture any of the oil derivatives. That's responsibility of crude oil. So energy is kind of confusing the whole situation. In fact, I usually will edit documents by saying electricity generation versus really energy, which is crude oil. And because you can have all the electricity you want, but as I say, breezes and sunshine are not going to run the world. The only thing good about getting rid of crude oil, it would ground Air Force One. They'll be able to get it off the ground.
Yeah, right. Now, I would point out that whereas China and India are building coal plants very, very rapidly, um, at this point, African countries are having a very difficult time doing that because they don't have the funding on their own to do it. And Western lenders, the World Bank, the IMF, and so on, have adopted policies that they will not lend capital to African countries so that they can build coal-fired power plants. They'll only lend for wind and solar projects. The result is that the Africans are being asked to go directly from wood and dried dung as their primary energy sources
Mm-hmm.
to wind and solar, which are much more expensive per unit of energy produced and which are intermittent, which cannot produce the enormous scale of electricity needed, and wind up with unstable grids. Essentially, we're telling the Africans something much worse than Marie Antoinette's "let them eat cake." We're saying, yeah, let them eat caviar and let them pay for it themselves. Well, this is just insane. I think it's terribly oppressive. It's truly an injustice by the West on those
Mhm.
countries. We have just a
Right.
few
But
minutes
Calvin,
left. Let me ask
remember,
each one of you to make some closing comments, and Ron, go ahead and respond to what
just
I
a
just said
comment,
too.
the fact that most of these developing countries that are living on $10 a day, they don't have enough money to subsidize themselves out of a paper bag. It's only the
That's right.
wealthy countries that can subsidize wind and solar, and with, they get direct benefits by coal-fired power plants. That's why they've got coal. It's abundant, it's inexpensive, it's reliable, it meets their needs. And if they don't get funding because the banks are deciding on that philosophy with their environmental, social, and governance philosophies, they're basically repressing these people to poverty for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, explain that. A lot of folks who are not into investing will not be familiar with that phrase you just used, environmental, social, and governance. ESG seems to be just taking over the investing world, taking over the
Mhm.
banking world. Uh, tell folks what this is all about and what's wrong with it. I mean, what could be wrong with saying we want our investments to help to make a clean, healthful, beautiful environment? We want it to produce a just society and a just government. You know, is this not
Well,
really what's going on?
the banks have basically gotten together and colluded to agree that they're not going to loan any money for any fossil fuel project. Now, fossil fuel, they're looking at all three: coal, natural gas, and oil. And, by not investing in them, it's going to take expensive money to do any project. There's going to be shortages and inflation. I mean, we're already seeing that when you start messing around with the supply chain of crude oil, and remember, crude oil is only manufactured into something else. If you reduce the supply of crude oil, well, the refineries are only processing it. And if you eliminate the crude oil, you're going to eliminate the refinery, and you're going to have one less manufacturer producing the products that really run the world. And so there's going to be, I call it, the ESG. It's an extreme shortages guaranteed, and a lot of inflation that goes with
Great,
it. And it's
well
going to
put,
be
well put.
terrible for society.
Todd, do you want to add to that about ESG?
Yeah, I think what you look at with ESG, I look at it as a bigger philosophical question that you're saying you're trying to define what is good. Favorite book of mine's Plato's The Republic, where Plato said, what is justice? What ESG is doing is saying there's only one form of good that typically votes for the Democratic Party. That typically means you follow only our rules. And that typically means that we're only going to subsidize renewables, battery storage systems, and electric vehicles because we have defined good as being something that we, as I say, they don't have to work for, that they can eliminate their competition, and they're the ones that can get through the regulations, the barriers that are put in place. So what it really is doing is saying, I'm going to define the good. A banker at a large American or European multinational bank, whether Citibank, Deutsche Bank, I'm now the arbitrator of good. And so I think that's
Hmm.
where we get into such the huge problems. And then, of course, it always has to be you either completely believe in global warming and climate change and everything is man's fault. And if we get rid of more human beings, then the world becomes a better place. I think one of the greatest, if you want to say what really just smacks at the entire ESG movement, it was Michael Moore's film, Planet of the Humans,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
I mean, the film just completely obliterates the entire renewables argument, which then obliterates ESG, which obliterates global warming and climate change. When you're going, we actually do have an answer for all of these things, and the answer is a wealthy country can use natural gas, and they can also use nuclear. Developing countries, whether in Central Asia, most of Asia, South America, and certainly Africa, there's a there's a diagram, there's a definite time frame for energy. They begin with
Mhm.
coal, they get off, like you said, cow dung, they get off burning wood, they then all of a sudden begin to have some form of human rights. Women then have birth control, sexual diseases go down, all of prosperity rises, and then you end up moving to natural gas, oil derivatives, and then ultimately nuclear, and then possibly more exotic things, whether it be hydrogen or fission or fusion one day. Pardon me.
Yeah.
So yeah, to me, the whole ESG movement, it's just all about control, and we're going to use climate change, and we're going to get rid of more people, or certainly put more people under our thumb, and we're going to
Yeah.
be the ones in control.
Yeah. Yeah. Chastity on our Facebook page asks, I was looking into the Great Reset, in other words, the World Economic Forum. Is this a deliberate move to keep capital in the West? These banks loaning the money, are they Western banks? It's so nefarious, it can't really come from goodwill ideology. What's the purpose of keeping these developing countries down? Uh, Both of you, I'm sure, could address that because you've really been watching exactly the sort of colonialist oppression of these developing countries by the West in the environmental movement.
I think you really just
How
said
about
it best,
Ron?
Calvin. Yeah,
Oh,
Ron, I'll go first. And Calvin, I think you just said it best. It's really
Todd.
returning to this colonial mentality. It's saying that I'm a billionaire, or I'm an elected official, a senator, a president, a prime minister, and I know better. It goes from saying I'm here to serve people. Great, I've done very well. I'm a billionaire, but I'm also going to look to expand libraries, give money away, employ more people, have better benefits. Instead, what we're seeing with so many of these folks, they're using it as a control mechanism and a way to garner more wealth. Um,
Yeah.
whether a great reset or not, I can't answer a question in the affirmative or the negative. It's just when they keep their capital, they're able to have more control, and they're able to keep people more oppressed and keep them down. And if somebody is down, then I have control, as opposed to the old, the rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Ron,
Good.
what do you say?
Well, like I say, the Green New Deal has the false impression that electricity is going to replace fossil fuels, but it might replace part of coal and natural gas. It's not going to replace crude oil. It can't. And the the climate change is happening. It's happened for 4 billion years, and it's going to continue to happen. Some people are going to live by it. Some people are going to die from it. And but when you take a look, what's the alternative? If you do nothing, we already know about the 11 million kids dying every year. And if you get rid of all the fossil fuels, that's going to be a worldwide phenomenon. People will be dying from diseases and malnutrition and starvation. And the medical industry is not going to be here. We'll be back in the 1800s. And I don't know, it's people are just mesmerized that energy, renewables, is going to replace all the fossil fuels. It can't. It physically cannot.
Right. All right. Well, again, thank you very much, both Ron Stein and Todd Royal, co-authors of Clean Energy Exploitations. We got just a few minutes left. How about some closing comments from each one of you? What would be the one thing, Todd, that you would really like to leave with all of our viewers?
That these are blood minerals, that I really do believe. I love Mr. DiCaprio's movie Blood Diamonds. I thought he was incredible in it. It was such a great story to highlight the fact that these are blood diamonds, that people are being oppressed, enslaved, and killed for them. Well, the exact same thing is happening for these rare earth and exotic metals and minerals like lithium, nickel, cobalt, and all the others, that people are being oppressed now in developing countries, so you and I can drive an electric vehicle or have a solar panel, a wind turbine, or storage system. So I really want to leave with your viewers and with you as well, Calvin, and the folks who get the book, that these are blood minerals, and that we are creating human rights violations the more and more that we use these things overseas as opposed to bringing the supply and value chains into the West, where there are environmental and labor laws, and the basis of our society is equality under the law and human rights.
Thank you. And Ron, how about you?
I would like people just to become more energy literate. In fact, Todd and I, our website is energyliteracy.net. Our books are there, our update articles are there. You know, feel free to, read the latest book, become transparent to what is happening so you're aware of it. And just be able to talk about it at the dinner table, because this is going to drive the economy, it's going to drive society, it's going to drive,
Mhm.
living and fatalities. And so I think Putin said it best, the country that controls oil and natural gas controls the world. And you might have wind and solar to provide electricity, but that's not going to run your airplanes, that's not going to run your cruise ships, that's not going to run your military, and or the medical industry. So just become a little bit more energy literate. And like I said, we do it in layman's terms. There's no big fancy charts and formulas to take a look at it. It's easy to understand language, and if you understand it and are transparent about it, then you can make a logical, informed decision. That's the primary goal.
That, that I think is
Energyliteracy.net.
excellent advice. Excellent advice. Uh, Again, give us the name of your website. That's energyliteracy.net. If I got it right.
.net, yes.
Yes.
And you'll see profiles of
Energyliteracy.net.
energy. Right.
All right.
Yes.
And there'll be profiles
Great.
of Todd and I, the books, the links which go right to Amazon for easy purchase, and there are summaries of the update articles that Todd and I have written. And yeah, if you have interest in a subject, and you can just contact us directly from there, and we'll put you on the list, and you'll get the update articles. And if you have a
Super.
question, feel free to email us.
Great. Well, Ron Stein, Todd Royal, thank you again very, very much for joining us tonight. Viewers, thank you for joining us tonight as well. We have greatly appreciated your being here. I would like to remind you that Ron and Todd's book, Clean Energy Exploitations, is available completely free, 350 some page book from the Cornwall Alliance as our way of saying thank you when you make a 100% tax deductible donation of literally any size and ask for it. To request your copy, go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, just write in promo code 22-02. That's promo code 22-02, or the title, Clean Energy Exploitations, and we will gladly send you a free copy of this book. Your donation will still be 100% tax deductible. I would like to mention one other thing. Ron just mentioned Amazon.com as a source for their books when you order through their website. The Cornwall Alliance has just worked out a way for you to donate to the Cornwall Alliance without spending an extra penny. If you go to smile.amazon.com, that's smile.amazon.com, and then follow instructions to choose a charity, you can choose Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation as a charity to whom Amazon will give 0.05% of every purchase that you make as a donation to Cornwall Alliance. So I'd invite you to do that. Go to smile.amazon.com and choose Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation as the charity that you would like to support with your donations. We have another guest coming on next week. This will be Steve Milloy, author of the book Scare Pollution, Why and How I'm sorry, I can't even remember the subtitle fully here, but why and how to fix the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. He's written quite a lot of other things. He runs a website called junkscience.com. Excellent website. Steve will be our guest next week. We'll be discussing that book, but also some recent articles that he has written. And so I would encourage you to join us then on the next episode of From the Stacks. Meanwhile, thank you very much for joining us. Pass the word on to others, and God bless you.